Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Guide London broadcast. My name is Katherine Alcock. I am a member of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides, the APTG, who run the Guide London website. And I'm very pleased that you're all joining me today for a very interesting talk about one of London's most famous sons, one of our most famous musicians, David Bowie, who we'll talk about shortly. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Guide London, the Association of Professional Tourist Guides, represent over 600 blue badge guides. That's one of these things here in London. We're all ready and raring to go now that things are lifting following the pandemic to show people around our wonderful city. And throughout the course of the lockdown, we have been doing a series of talks every Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. here in England. So if you're joining us for the first time, let us know in the comments. If you're coming back, let us know that as well. Let us know where you're calling in from. We always love to know what far-flung corners of the world you're all from. So let us know if we've got anyone joining us from the US, from Canada, from Australia, from around the corner in London. Just pop it on the comments and I'll be able to see that and give you a shout out and a wave. We do love to know. If you're watching this on catch up, of course, which you can on YouTube or on Facebook, still let us know where you're calling from. We love to know that information. We love to get to know you all a bit better. So do say hello to us. I can see that we've got hello from Argentina. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Also, of course, let us know if you are big music fans, and if so, who it is you love. I'm hoping that you're going to be a big fan of David Bowie, because he is, of course, the person that we're going to be speaking about today. And to talk a little bit about him, I am very pleased to introduce my colleague, Eddie Lerner. He is a founder member of the APTG, ladies and gentlemen, and knows an awful lot about the wonderful world of David Bowie. You also run a blog, don't you, Edwin? A Day in the Life of the Tourist Guide.
Yeah, sure. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Katherine, for the introduction. I became a guide back in the Stone Age, before there were ever any sort of things like mobile phones or the internet existed. Many years ago, I bought a house in Brixton, and that's my part of London. And I called this talk, David Bowie, the boy from Brixton, because that was where he was born. And I have done a couple of these talks before. I did one on James Bond, which I wore my tuxedo, and I did one of the Beatles and tried to look vaguely Beatlish. But I went and had my first haircut of the year the other day as the barber started to open, and I asked my barber if he could make me look like David Bowie. And he took one look at my double chin and my pot belly and my grey hair, and he said, "It ain't going to happen. So I'm afraid you just got me wearing my blue badge here." And I hope you enjoy the talk on David Bowie, who came from the same part of London, even though I don't look much like him. He was born in 1947, and if you want to see the mural of Bowie, then you can go to Brixton Underground Station, and it's just across the road there. It was made by an Australian artist actually called James Cochrane, known as Jimmy C, who's also done pictures of Shakespeare, Lewis Hamilton, various other people around London. This is what a lot of artists do, and you can buy a copy of that, actually one of the originals, which I've got in my house, in fact, and that's how they advertise themselves, and that's become a great shrine for Bowie fans, and a lot of them came there and left messages and flowers after his death in 5 years ago in 2016, and you can see that famous lightning flash across his face just there. So that's the portrait of David Bowie, who was born in Brixton in a house just 5 minutes walk away from the picture, which is in Stansfield Road. You can see there a perfectly ordinary house, a London house between Brixton and Stockwell underground stations, and you can go there. You won't see any plaque on the wall, because English Heritage, who maintain the blue plaque system in London, say you have to be dead for 20 years. So people like Bob Marley, John Lennon, George Harrison have got blue plaques on the wall for buildings which are associated with them, but not an official one, at least as yet, for David Bowie at his birthplace. He was born there in 1947. He was born David Jones, actually. He had an older brother, a half-brother, who'd been born during the war to his mother, but Terry, his half-brother, his father had disappeared during wartime, and his mother remarried, and then David Bowie was brought up, and it was his half-brother who introduced him to jazz, and his father who introduced him to rock and roll. And when he was just 6 years old, the family moved down to southeast London, to Beckenham, which is really where he came into his own, in the southeast of London, down in Beckenham. And that's an early portrait taken of him when he was about 20. A friend of mine who's a guide, who asked not to be named, but as a teenager, she used to go down to Denmark Street, which is London's Tin Pan Alley, and she saw the famous singers and musicians there, the pop musicians of the day, people like the Kinks and the Pretty Things and the Moody Blues, and got their autographs. And Davy Jones was often there. He had a group called the Lower Third, and he parked his van in the street, and he'd go up to them and chat to them, and he'd sign their autographs, even if they didn't want them. He was so keen to make an impression. An early example in the 1960s of networking, I suppose we call it nowadays. He changed his name to Bowie, or Bowie as it should really be pronounced, after the famous Bowie knife in America. And that was because there was another band around at the time called the Monkees, which was kind of studio created band, very popular. They had their own TV show, and their lead singer was called Davy Jones. And so David Jones changed his name to David Bowie. And then his first hit in the late 60s, just a matter of days before the Apollo craft landed on the moon, they released a Bowie single, Space Oddity, and that became a great success. By this time, he was based down in southeast London, and you can see a plaque there at the Ziggy restaurant commemorating him. It used to be the Three Tons pub, and that's where he first began to perform. He was in a variety of different groups and bands. He was friendly with Reg Dwight, better known as Elton John. The two of them knew each other before they became famous, and also with Peter Frampton, who was in Humble Pie. And in fact, Peter Frampton's father, Owen Frampton, was his headmaster, and he encouraged his interest in his early interest in music. And there's another place which, if you do go down as far as Beckenham, it's not so easy to get to as Brixton, because it's not on the tube, on the underground system. It's down near the borders of Kent in southeast London, but there's a bandstand there which you can go to, which is now called the Bowie Bandstand, and he performed there. A bandstand is the sort of place you go to on a Sunday afternoon to drink cups of tea out of your flask and listen to a brass band. They're very Victorian type of creations, and this is one of the original ones, which is over 100 years old. But he performed there with his group. By this time he was David Bowie, and it became an annual event, a Bowie concert there at the Beckenham, or the Bowie Bandstand in Beckenham. You can see just there. So that's down in southeast London, and then after that he started to make his name, and he really made his reputation, I think, with a television program which some of the older ones amongst you may remember, which was called Top of the Pops. And you can see that in the next slide. That was on BBC on Thursday night. And Bowie, by this time, he's got a red mullet hairstyle. He's adopted the persona of Ziggy Stardust. And on the 6th of July in 1972, he's performing the song Starman, again influenced by space. And he puts his arm around the shoulder of his guitarist, Mick Ronson, and then he turns to the camera, points at it, which nobody did. It wasn't the sort of thing which pop stars did in those days, but Bowie made his own rules, and he's saying, I had to phone someone, so I picked on you. Sorry about my singing voice there. Anyway, that was in 1972, and a lot of people date that time to when David Bowie became a star. This was not going to be a one-hit wonder. This was a man who was here to last. And he'd adopted the persona of Ziggy Stardust, and that became David Bowie, really. And this is a famous album cover here, which was taken in HADDON Street in Soho, the photograph. And It was outside a fur coat shop, actually, which is called K West, which could be pronounced Quest, I suppose. Excuse me, I'm sorry, a little bit of symbolism there. But this was an iconic album cover and a photograph taken there in Soho, just around the back of Regent Street. And in fact, the land belongs to the Crown Estate, and they put up their very first plaque there, not a blue plaque, a grey plaque, to commemorate the creation, the persona of Ziggy Stardust, which had been created by David Bowie there. And throughout 1972 and into 1973, Bowie and Ziggy were sort of more or less interchangeable. But then he found that this persona was taking him over. So suddenly, on the in a concert at the Odeon Hammersmith, which is a popular venue for pop groups, he said that he was going to stop singing and performing. A lot of people thought that Bowie himself was going to retire then, but of course he was still going to be around. But he decided to get rid of the Ziggy Stardust persona. And his next album, which came out, was called Aladdin Sane. And this, he sort of morphed into Aladdin Sane, but he never allowed this persona to take over him. You can see that distinctive lightning flash across his face. He's still got the red mullet hairstyle just there. But now it was David Bowie. You can see that at the top of the album cover, and the name was a little sort of pun, Aladdin Sane. You can see there. And that was actually recorded while Ziggy Stardust was still in existence, but he was retired soon after that. So Bowie then had become a face and a name to be remembered. He went to New York for a while. He toured America. He was very successful over there and very popular. And then he went to Berlin. He was having some personal problems with drugs and with his marriage was breaking up as well. And so he ended up in Berlin. Just before we go across to there, we can see the little plaque. I took that picture there. That's actually a BBC plaque. It's not an official English heritage plaque. It's on the site of the Trident Studio, which is where he recorded, and as well as many other groups there. And one of the reasons why Trident Studios was so popular was because they had an 8-track tape recording machine, and other studios like Abbey Road only had 4-track machines. And Paul McCartney was very enthused by Trident, and they recorded Hey Jude there, the Beatles, and several songs from the so-called White Album, the Beatles album were recorded there. But their final album, of course, was at Abbey Road, and that was what it was called as well. But all that's left of Trident Studios was closed down in the early 80s, is the little plaque on the wall and the name there of Trident House, which is in St Anne's Court in London. Let's go across to Berlin. If there's anybody listening from Germany, you'll know that Bowie spent a few years. He recorded 3 albums with Brian Eno and Robert Fripp in Berlin. This is the Berlin trilogy, Low, Lodger, and Heroes. And you can see the cover of Heroes there, and a little plaque they put up to remember his contribution to bringing down the Berlin Wall, because he thought the people who were trying to escape from East Germany to get to the West were heroes, so he dedicated an album to them. And he used to play concerts near to the wall where East Germans could come and listen to the music for nothing. They couldn't cross the wall, they couldn't see him, but they could hear the music. And he was sort of telling them that he was on their side. And a lot of people in Berlin, if you ever go to that city, will say that he was important in helping to bring the wall down, which happened, of course, 12 years later in 1989. So that's another one of his albums there. But this time his first marriage had broken up, and he was moving between America, Berlin, he stayed in for a few years, and then he came back to London just there. And he was also, he was a many-sided man, was David Bowie. He was an actor as well. And if you may have seen some of these films which he's been in. The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is probably his finest performance, one of his early performances. He could have made a living as an actor, I think, and would have been very good. He was very interested in dance, in movement. He appeared in several films. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence was a fairly conventional prisoner of war film with Tom Conti and a few Japanese actors and Japanese directors in that. Labyrinth, which was a sort of fantasy film with made by Jim Henson with a lot of puppets. He was in that as well. But I think his finest role was The Man Who Fell to Earth. He had a few cameo appearances in films as well. So he was always interested in acting and in dance. In his early years, in fact, he was very friendly with a man called Lindsay Kemp, who taught him to dance. And he never was a professional dancer, but he was very interested in movement and dance in his performances there. And that was a natural thing for him. And he wasn't one of these pop singers who did a little bit of movie acting to increase his profile, because he did nearly 200 performances as Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, on Broadway in New York in the 1980s. So he served his time as a working stage actor as well as a film actor. And in fact, there are a couple of films, as you can see in the next slide, which are sort of inspired by his life. The first one, Velvet Goldmine, which I think is quite a good film, actually, made back in the 1980s. And it was about a sort of like slightly reclusive, glamorous pop star. And more recently, I haven't seen this film, I must admit, Johnny Flynn, who is also an actor and a musician, has been in a film called Stardust, which you can see there on the right-hand side. Unfortunately, neither film got the blessing of Bowie and his family, so they weren't able to use his music. And certainly in Stardust, that must have been a big loss. But Velvet Goldmine, if you ever get a chance to see that, probably on television or to download it, then that's an interesting film, which is inspired by David Bowie's life, but is not directly autobiographical, where Stardust is more of a biopic. So that's David Bowie on film there, and he's also in exhibition as well. And excuse me, his son was son is a film director. Actually, these pictures were taken with Duncan Jones, his son. That's on the left-hand side. His son reverted to the family name, and so he's a film director. His most famous film is probably Moon, and Bowie's second wife is the model Iman, and she survived him, in fact. They lived in New York, and those pictures were taken at the Tribeca Festival when Moon was having its debut there. So he's very supportive of his son, and he has a daughter as well from his second marriage. And he's also remembered in the exhibition, which started off at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A, as we always call it in London. And a lot of guides will meet their groups outside there. So we know it very well. If they're coming in from Heathrow Airport in a coach, we'll often meet them outside the V&A. And usually the first thing I do is point out the statue of Queen Victoria, who's above the archway, and Prince Albert, who's above the doorway there. Because she was monarch, Victoria is above her husband, Elizabeth, the Queen, and the late Prince Philip. And that's a great museum there, like a lot of museums in London. It's free of charge to enter. And they decided to put on a one-man exhibition there. Bowie produced a lot of his own costumes, his clothes, and various things which he collected over the years and gave them to the museum. They didn't think it was going to attract a huge number of people. In fact, it was the best attended exhibition in the history of the Victoria and Albert Museum. They have a lot of exhibits there, but they have these special exhibitions which you have to pay to get into. And that was the first stop. They had over 300,000 people paying to go to the Bowie exhibition there at the Victoria and Albert, the V&A. And then it started to travel around the world. And as was his wish, it ended up at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, where Bowie lived. And by that time, over 2 million people had seen it, and now you have to view it online. Bowie died actually in 2016 while the exhibition was going around the world, and they thought they might cancel it, but in fact it actually produced a huge amount of interest in him, and it helped to encourage numbers of people to go and see there. The exhibition called David Bowie is the Victoria and Albert Museum, or the V&A, as we always call it in London. As I say, Bowie sadly died in 2016, and he was mourned around the world, as you can see from these photographs here. The one on the left-hand side I took near my house in Brixton, and there's flowers all around there. Bowie's on the wall, as you can see, Jimmy C's portrait, and there are fans in the background there writing messages and leaving flowers to remember their hero and the great musician, singer, actor, dancer, artist as well. He was a fine and talented artist, a great collector of art also. And so this is the place where people go. And also his American fans would go to New York, so you can see lots of flowers left outside his apartment home in New York. You can see that there on the right-hand side. I haven't got over there for many years, but that picture is from Wiki Commons. And if you want to go and pay your respects to David Bowie, then you can do so in London. We'll happily take you there. We do our own rock and roll tours. And as I live in Brixton, I often take people over. If they come to visit me, you just got to come down as far as the underground station, just cross over the road, and you see a couple of friends of mine there on the pavement next to Morley's department store. Just walk across the road at the traffic light. From there, there'll probably be a busker outside the underground station. You might even hear the Next Generation, David Bowie, performing there, a street entertainer. And you can see all the flags, which were, all the flowers, I'm sorry, which were left there by the statue of Bowie. It's so popular as it's become that Lambeth Council had to cover it in perspex now because there were so many people scrawling graffiti and messages on there. And they wanted to protect the original mural as far as possible. So there he is then, David Bowie, a singer, entertainer, actor, painter, and possibly the coolest guy on the planet. You can see various different photographs of him here, performing in action from his early days up into his later days. He gave up performing about 5 years or so before his death, but his final album, Black Star, was released just 2 days after his 69th birthday, and that's he died very shortly after that. Then, so we don't have a David anymore, but we still remember him as being a great entertainer, a great performer, and an iconic figure in the modern story of London. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed that little introduction to David Bowie, or Bowie, and I'm happy to answer your questions if I can, if you put them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. And yes, if you do have any questions for Eddie, do please pop them in the chat. We'll see them. If it's YouTube, if it's Facebook, we'll have a little look. But I suppose I have to start with the most obvious question to ask any fan of David Bowie, Eddie, and that is, what's your favourite track?
Well, my favourite track actually is Absolute Beginners, which he wrote as a song for a film, in fact. And I love it. I play it in the car all the time. A lot of people, of course, like Space Oddity, Starman. He produced many tracks. He kept on producing. He did duos with one of the few people who performed with both John Lennon and Paul McCartney. He performed with Bing Crosby. He performed at the Queen Memorial concert to Freddie Mercury, where he recited the Lord's Prayer. Only Bowie could have got away with that, I think. And he teamed up with lots of musicians and creative people and performers around during his career, as well as his acting. But my favourite track is Absolute Beginners. I love that song. I think it's great, you know.
Seems like everybody wanted to work with him, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and I have to say, I'm of the generation that's familiar with Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes, because here in the UK there were some television programs that were sort of built around those tracks, and that's how I was introduced to Bowie's music. And I think a lot of people my age probably have the same story. We've now I've got a question here from Ruby, who's asking how did he pronounce his name? And I tend to go backwards and forwards. Bowie.
You pronounce it properly, Katherine.
Okay.
Bowie. It should be. Everybody says Bowie. I don't know why it is. It's one of those things that I think it's a difference between the American pronunciation and the English pronunciation. But I think his original intention was that he should be known as David Bowie, but it just somehow it morphed into Bowie. I think that's a difference between the way the English and the Americans. You know, Oscar Wilde said of us, we're two peoples divided by a common language. So we speak the same language, but in different ways. And I think in England we tend to say Bowie, but his original intention was it should be Bowie.
Absolutely. Well, you get counties divided by the same language in this country, so so absolutely. Ruby's Canadian, so she says she'll go with Bowie. We've had people joining us from all over the world. Thank you very much. Jane says, I think Jane's saying "Let's Dance" is her favourite track.
That's a great song as well. Yeah, he was a great dancer, was Bowie. He was a natural dancer and performer. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got hello to Andrea from Virginia. Hi, Andrea. Good to see you. Hello from Marrakesh. Hi, Hisham. I hope I'm saying that right. Hello to you, a fellow tour guide over there. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Indeed. Just having a look. Who else have we got in the chat? We've got another Canadian. Hello, Natalia. Lovely to see you. And Penny's joining us from cold and rainy Bedford. Well, we feel the Penny. Thank you so much for joining us all. I hope you've had a wonderful time listening to Eddie. I certainly have. If you want to know a little bit more about Eddie and what he's up to, you can visit his website. You're on eddielernertourguide.co.uk, aren't you, Eddie? And as we mentioned at the beginning, Eddie also writes a blog, which is diaryofaTouristGuide.blogspot. So if you want the inside gossip on what it's like being a tourist guide, that is certainly the place to head. And of course, you can visit, daisies, that's not quite what I meant to do. You can visit our website. Let me just call that up for you now. We, of course, at the APTG are behind the Guide London website. You can see here's Eddie's page. So if you want to go and knows a little bit more about Eddie, lovely picture in front of Stonehenge there, Eddie. Then you can come and hear a bit more about him. Or of course, if you're looking for a virtual tour, if you're not quite ready to make your way over to the UK just yet, things are still up in the air, aren't they? You can click on this button at the top, which says London Virtual Tour, and it will take you down to a list of suggestions, different things you might want to request, and all the way down at the bottom, you can put in your search here, and you'll be matched with one of our members, one of our tourist guides, who will be able to help you, to tell you a little bit about the wonderful world of London from the comfort of your very own home. So we hope you've had a wonderful afternoon. Do join us next week, same time, 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Thank you so much, Eddie, for that interesting foray back in time, back into the world of rock and roll. I hope we'll all be able to head out to some gigs soon, some live music. Wouldn't that be nice?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for listening, and I hope to see you on the road, as we say in the business, back out on tour one of these days here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your week.